Jacob Nordby Christensen, Director of Responsible Investment at Sparinvest. Why focusing on responsible investments?
Well, our international arm of Sparinvest picked up on a trend amongst other institutional investors where they were focusing on the UN principles for responsible investments. And once we learned that, we investigated what was the materiality of these principles. And what we found was that it was actually quite in line with our way of thinking when we did investments. So it was a natural decision for us to actually adopt the principles and sign up to it.
And can you explain about the principles?
Well, the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investments, also known as UNPRI, were formed in 2006 by a body of institutional investors supported by the UN, where the aim was to get the investment community to consider ESG, environmental and social and governance factors in the investment process, because the thinking was that that would ultimately have a positive effect, would have an effect on the performance of portfolios. There are 6 principles in all, and there's 3 objectives basically that in short that they try to achieve. The first thing is for environmental and social and governance issues to be included into the investment process. So we as a signatory are obliged to actually take ESG issues into consideration when we invest. The second thing is that we as signatories should act as active owners, meaning that we should enter into dialogue with the companies we have invested in and try to influence them, make them aware and influence them towards having a strategy and to environmental and social and governance issues. And the third thing is that we should also tell the world, tell other institutional investors, and encourage them to also sign up to the principles and become part of this with us. We should collaborate with other institutional investors on increasing the effectiveness of the principles by doing company dialogue, for instance, put together with other institutional investors. And the final thing is to report on our progress on our work with environmental and social and governance issues in our investment process, and generally being a responsible investor.
And how can UN and a company like Sparinvest benefit from the principles?
I think ultimately UN, I mean, we have some issues in the world globally, and environmental issues and social issues and governance issues, and I think that has been a driver for the UN to get awareness of that and actually to start a movement on that. For Sparinvest, this is also about, I mean, it fits extremely well with our investment process as it is. I mean, we've always, as value investors, been very concerned on getting the full risk spectrum of a company that we consider investing in, and that goes whether it's financial issues or whether it's been environmental, social, or governance issues, i.e. non-financial issues. What happens now is that we will now do it in a very rigorous and systematic way, and that really improves on the information level upon which we derive our investment decisions. So that's a huge plus for Sparinvest.
Do the principles constrain your fund managers by restricting their investment universe?
No, not at all. And let me explain why. UNPRI, the principles are not designed to exclude companies from being eligible for investment. What the principles try to achieve is for us as investment managers to be aware of environmental, social and governance issues when we invest, and also to increase the awareness with the companies we invest in, go into dialogue and have them really understand the ESG issues that they may be facing. It is not about excluding companies, it is more about inclusion rather than exclusion. And let me give you an example of that, why we think that's actually quite important feature of the principles. Just imagine you're walking down the street, and on the other side of the street a man is beating up another guy. Would you then exclude the situation and say, I'm turning back to it, I don't want to have anything to do with it? Or would you achieve something from actually engaging and try to stop the wrongdoing from actually happening? We believe that engaging, entering into dialogue really makes a difference rather than excluding.
How did you integrate the ESG principles in your day-to-day work?
Well, what we did was that we had a very thorough search and due diligence for research providers on environmental, social and governance issues, ESG issues. And we've ended up with two internationally acclaimed suppliers of research on ESG issues. And they feed our investment process with information on this. And then our portfolio managers take this information and use that in the investment research and investment decision making on an equal basis as regular financial input to the investment process. So we are very systematic in our approach to handling ESG issues with the companies when we decide on where to invest. And it has really lifted the level of information upon which we derive our investment decisions.
But is the ESG information available for all companies?
No, that's been a problem that we've been facing in our work with implementing the ESG the principles into our investment process, because in Sparinvest we like to find companies that are not on the radar screen of the investment community per se. So obviously we will also end up in a situation where a lot of the companies that we like to look at are not covered necessarily by the research providers that we use. The way we deal with that is that we get some very, very high quality sector reports from our research providers. And we then take that and break that to pieces and find what are the issues in this sector. And then we take these issues and basically create a proprietary Sparinvest questionnaire to the company in question and ask the company to actually address these issues that we've found from sector reports. And in that way we secure that we have this uniform and constant information on ESG issues also for the companies that are not necessarily covered by the research providers.
Focusing on the dialogue and the contact with the companies, how will you conduct your active ownership in the companies?
Well, it's been a key point for us just to do this in a way that it really adds value to our process, and it's very early in our implementation process. We discovered that this thing about active ownership and company dialogue, being in dialogue with the companies, was such a crucial point of the general investment process that this had to be handled by our portfolio managers. And also we want to do a focused dialogue with companies, meaning that we will identify the issues within our portfolio of holdings where we have a quite good likelihood of achieving a result from our dialogue. And it's also very important, it's a cardinal point for us, that the companies perceive this as being a respectful dialogue, not a monologue, but where we are two parties discussing these issues, and it should be confidential, so they should really trust us when we do this dialogue for them. That way we believe that we will increase the likelihood of success through our dialogue with companies tremendously.
If the dialogue is not successful, could the result be that you divest the companies?
It's important to stress that we do not start a dialogue with the company with the gun pointed to their heads and saying, okay, if you do not do as we say, then we will divest. It's not at all. We do not have a deadline for divesting, and it's not on the agenda to divest when we start a company dialogue. But having said that, obviously when we talk to the companies and if the responses that we get are far from what we would have expected on their approach to dealing with certain ESG issues, this obviously inflicts on our risk assessment of the general investment case in that company. And that would, again, go back to the investment process and the investment decision and have us perhaps reconsider because this is obviously new information on the specific company, and whether that would end up in a situation where we would divest or not, that's something that we will evaluate when that happens. But we do not start out with setting a deadline for success and then threat with divesting. That's not the way we do it.
And what is the current status of implementing the principles?
Well, I've been working with the investment teams and the portfolio managers on implementing the principles of responsible investments into our daily operations. I'm happy to say at this point that we have actually achieved that today we are working according to the principles in our operations, in our investments, in the active equity holdings and also in our corporate bonds funds.
Having implemented the responsible investment principles, does it mean that there's no future for ethical funds in Sparinvest?
Not at all. And I think it's important to stress that there's a general misconception often seen between the terms responsible investments and ethical investing. The two terms are often used at random, and there's a quite distinctive difference. Responsible investment is about taking ESG factors into consideration when you invest and trying to influence the companies you've invested in towards taking the factors into consideration and actually adopting a strategy towards these factors. Ethical investing, on the other hand, is about determining some companies you do not like to invest in because of certain criteria that you define. And our investors have helped us define these criteria, and that's criteria, for instance, like alcohol, tobacco, porn, and the likes. And in the case of Sparinvest, we will, for instance, not invest in any company who's involved in distribution or production of combat weapons. So that's a clear distinction between the two terms. And it's also important to add that our ethical funds are also responsible funds. Our approach to responsible investments applies just in the same way as it does with all of our other funds to the holdings that we have in the ethical funds. So we take ESG considerations in the investment process in the ethical fund as well.
Can you summarize the benefits for me as an investor that Sparinvest is working according to the UN principles?
Well, I think it's first of all we are now getting a systematic and diligent input to our investment process provided from top-class research providers on ESG issues, and that has really lifted the level of information upon which we derive our investment decisions going forward. And also, I truly believe that the element of entering into dialogue with the companies, trying to move them on ESG issues, will ultimately reflect on the valuation of our portfolio and thus be positive to the investors. And let me just stress, I mean, Sparinvest, we don't do this to be able to label ourselves as responsible investors. We do this because we truly believe that this will ultimately add value to the portfolio, to our investors in the future.